Hey Wes.
Hey Ray, how you doing?
Oh, today I'm a little struggling, Wes. It's tough. The isolation thing's getting to me after a while. You know, tired
Oh,
of
I hear you. I
nothing.
hear you.
But
Hey, did you go to the committee meeting this morning?
yeah, I went online. Was online.
Okay.
Yeah, it was interesting. That guy from Wild North was there. Dale,
Yeah.
and I don't know. I asked him a whole bunch of questions about household nuisances, and so did other people, and it was kind of an interesting discussion of what he does and how it's regulated, and it's like nobody covers this area of small wild animals. Like it's like fish and wildlife. They're moose and bears and stuff like that. And coyotes mostly, and he's like geese and birds and smaller things that it's just a big hole, right? So yeah, that's pretty interesting. And that guy, you've probably talked to him before. You've heard him talk before, right?
I think I've met him. I'm not sure that I have. I know that we're live here, and I
Oh,
was just unfortunate I wasn't able to be there. Work sort of took me away from it, but I
kind
was
of
glad you're able to be there. So anyway,
okay.
yeah. I was going to welcome Brittany to her first council meeting online, but she might have been there last Monday though too. So she was there this morning, no doubt. Afternoon, Jackie.
Hi, Wes. How are you today?
It's all good. It's all good.
Saw you walking yesterday.
You know what? For the first month of the year, January, we've had nice walking weather of late, eh?
Yeah, we walked yesterday too.
Yeah.
Actually bumped into Nolan.
Oh,
Yeah.
What did he have to say? I know we're live here though, so
Oh, he's good. He's a big walker.
yeah. Maybe I should get up and go for a walk.
Hey, come for a walk with us.
When do you go?
6 feet behind us. Oh, we just go. Dean and I just go whenever we can. Like we'll do it again later this afternoon because, as Wes says, it's sunny and warm.
Yeah, it looks pretty sunny outside there.
So I'm looking at the time and it's 1:30. So I'm going to call this meeting to order. And attendance of the meeting is our mayor here with us?
Yes, I see her.
Oh, good. Thank you, David. So attendance is is 100% with committee members, Councillor Broadhead, Councillor Watkins, Mayor Herron, and myself. And I also see Councillor Jolly and Councillor Hughes on the call. So welcome to everybody.
I'm here as well.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Councillor Mackay, I apologize. I did see you. So welcome to everybody. Adoption of the agenda. Is there any additions to the agenda from anybody or amendments? Okay, seeing none, can I have a motion, please, to move the agenda? Sorry, I'm trying to see everybody. I got to change my view. Ray, Councillor Watkins. Any debate? No, all those in favor? Okay, that's carried unanimously. We do have an appointment with us today, so I'd like to welcome Mr. Rod Matthews, who wants to speak to us around the traffic bylaw that's before us today. So I'll hand it over to you, Mr. Matthews. Thank you for taking the time to read this agenda report and come and talk to us about it.
All right, can you hear me now?
Sure can. Yep.
Let me try the video. See how my bandwidth is working today. I shut everything else off. It's still not. There we go.
Yeah, we can see you and we can hear you.
All righty then. Here's my little speech. Are you ready?
We are ready for you.
Well, first of all, thank you to the city for paving that part of Mission Avenue in front of my house. Previously, the road was just asphalt and black dirt. This is a nice upgrade. Cynicism takes over and starts me thinking about why the city is doing this. Then I see that you are opening Meadowview Drive again. The city is increasing the strength of the road to handle the increase in traffic from Riverside. It was agreed that Meadowview Drive would be permanently closed when the district of Riverside was built, even though Fire Hall 3 hadn't been built yet and Fire Hall 1 was the only fire EMS access available. The city hasn't taken into account why there was a slow zone on Mission Avenue to begin with. It's a blind corner. Drivers cannot see around it, and residents cannot see traffic coming as they back their vehicles straight to the road to handle the increase. The city hasn't taken into account why there was a slow zone on Mission Hill. We're not that far from 7 hills in the same gradient. Looking at Google Maps today, it showed that mild traffic slowdowns on Mission Avenue, but did not include the slow zone. If you could just Google map the area, you could see the homes and the drive. The city hasn't yet. Removal of the 30-kilometer-an-hour zone increases the speed traffic about 40%. That's all traffic. Those who follow the posted speed limit and those who don't. Last year, I spoke to looking at Google Maps today on Mission Avenue to council about the traffic the city had for that area. It was proposed that Meadowview Lane be extended north over the railway, removal of the railway tracks, and connect with Mission Avenue. A traffic circle intersection would be built next to the railway crossing. It was preposterous. All traffic on Mission Avenue would be halted with every train that went through St. Albert. And again, you can't back out of a driveway with a traffic circle in front of your house. Now for the sardonic questions you have to add here. So last year, the city wanted traffic calming in this area. I don't know if it's a blanket removal of all 6 slow zones without research, or is it the photo radar lobby pressuring the city? It's a good spot for photo radar. Hint, hint. Is it possible to put a crosswalk on that spot so children can cross Mission Avenue and go to the playground and park? Can the city use those concrete pinchers for crosswalks here? Will the engineering algorithms allow it? One city engineer reported that there would be an increase in traffic of some 600 vehicles to this Mission Avenue curve. The city is opening a shortcut to Ray Gibbon Drive from central St. Albert, and you believe that there will only be an increased traffic of 600 vehicles? Let me say that again. A shortcut between central St. Albert and Anthony Henday Drive. So please, let's rethink this and at least come on by during the afternoon rush hour and observe for yourselves. Thank you. Questions, comments?
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. And yes, now we are open for questions. Anybody have questions for Mr. Matthews? Mayor Herron.
Not so much a question, but Mr. Matthews did comment on my Facebook page. I wrote your question down about that. So Rodney, when we are having the discussion, I will be asking our staff that. So just so you know. And thank you for commenting on the Facebook page.
Thank you for noticing.
Councillor Watkins.
Yeah, I just had some clarification there because I don't know about you, but his audio was really breaking up a lot there. It was kind of hard to understand you at times. So what is your ask, or what is your main concern is?
That the slow zone be maintained at Mission Avenue in the corner by the grain elevators by Morgan Park. If I can clarify that.
Okay, yeah, okay. I'm just trying to look at it. I'm on Google Maps. I'm trying to look at that and just see exactly where you're talking about. Okay.
And if you zoom in closely, you can see the houses and where the driveways are on Google Maps. Your maps don't show that.
Okay, so once again, sorry, it's the slow zone be maintained on Mission Avenue.
By Morgan Park, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Matthews? Not seeing any, Mr. Matthews. I certainly know the area well. I drive it a lot, and I understand what you're saying about the blind spot, for sure. So thanks again, and I think as we have this conversation today, we will be asking questions of admin around some of these specific locations and some of the proposed changes. So it might be easier for you to log off and go on to live stream to watch this rather than be on this platform. And then you won't have to. Okay, so, and we will take it from here, and our staff is just about to give us a presentation on this subject. So thanks again for joining us.
Thanks.
No problem. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Okay, before we move into new business or the traffic bylaw amendments, I just want to have approval for the minutes. Did anybody see any errors or omissions? Councillor Broadhead, you need to unmute.
I'd be happy to move the adoption of the approval of the minutes.
Any debate? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Moving on to 6.1, bylaw 18/2005 traffic bylaw amendments presented by Dean Schick.
Good afternoon, everyone. Madam Chair and committee members, I'm very happy to be here this afternoon to present a presentation here on final recommendations of proposed amendments to our traffic bylaw. If you give me one moment here, I'll share my screen and then start in on the presentation, and we'll have time to go over any discussion points or questions following the presentation here. Okay, can everyone, you should see now a PowerPoint slide for a traffic bylaw opening. Everyone see that?
I just bumped into a, sorry, I found
You can. We're getting a little bit of feedback from somebody's place.
Probably me, sorry guys.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, go ahead, Dean.
Okay, thank you. And again, good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. As noted, my name is Dean Schick. I'm the manager of transportation with the engineering department, and I'm here to present to the committee final recommendations of proposed traffic bylaw amendments that have resulted from a detailed engineering study and public engagement process on our citywide speeds, with a few other areas aligned to cleaning up our bylaw document itself. Today's presentation will capture the purpose of work performed and provide a quick review of past work completed with a summary of received public feedback that has been used to inform on final recommendations of potential bylaw updates for consideration, as well as some traffic management factors for this committee and council's consideration. This project and presentation check 3 key strategies that align to the city's transportation safety plan. 1, a detailed review of the full transportation network posted speed limits. So this is including arterial roadways, collector roadways, as well as representation of our local roadways. 2, a detailed school zone review. And a 3rd, a detailed playground zone review. The objective of each strategy looks to perform updated reviews in alignment with today's community needs, priorities, and best practices that will result in a transparent document to confirm the way the city has addressed zones and speed limits. As a quick reminder of what has been completed to date, with the preliminary speed limit recommendations, a citywide speed review was completed in 2019 that first focused largely on an engineering approach. Actions completed that developed proposed recommendations included a current practice review of other municipal agencies on speed management and postings, applying Transportation Association of Canada guidelines for establishing posted speed limits, application of provincial guidelines for school zone and playground zones. Oh, sorry, I just got a note here that you guys are not seeing a change in the screen. Were you looking at?
Dean, you just have to go to the actual present or slideshow. You've just got it on the open format.
Go to presentation view.
Go to the slideshow or from beginning.
Sorry, everyone. This is what happens when you.
Maybe go up to it to from beginning. Doesn't that work?
I had hit that.
Mm-hmm. Gotta hit it in the middle.
Are you seeing a change now?
Yeah,
Or
we're on to engineering recommendations number, and that's page 5, but we really haven't seen 2, 3, and 4 very much. A little bit of 2.
Mm-hmm. How's that? Is that now on a presentation outline?
That has your front page with slides on the side.
Bear with me 1 sec here. Sorry for the technical. I'm going to share and change the screen here.
No problem. Okay, so now we're at page 4.
There we go.
There's page 3. Okay,
But all your notes are there though.
now we have your notes.
Boy, I apologize, everyone.
Okay.
Okay, let's try this again. Now we should be on.
It's wonderful. Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, we just, hopefully everyone, the presentation outline itself, again, to go back, I apologize. But essentially we'll go through and do a little bit of a reminder here on the actions completed to date with the engineering review and the recommendations that have been developed with that preliminary review, and then oversight of the public engagement performed, and then the actual input of what we heard from residents that inform on the final recommendations that will be discussed in regards to the recommendations, as well as some traffic management points. And then we'll end with discussion and any questions. So as kind of previously noted, there's kind of 3 key areas here that are being checked in regards to strategies within the city's transportation safety plan with this project and presentation. We performed a review of the full transportation network and posted speed limits. A detailed school zone review was conducted, as well as a detailed playground zone review. With this, the objective of each strategy looks to perform updated reviews in alignment with today's community's needs, priorities, and best practices that will result in a transparent document to confirm the way the city has addressed zones and speed limits. In terms of what's been completed to date, a quick reminder of the preliminary review included some actions around conducting a current practice review from other municipal agencies on speed management and speed posting practices, application of Transportation Association of Canada guidelines for establishing posted speeds, applying the provincial guidelines for school and playground zones, site investigations and reviews of our local roadway network, as well as considerations of safe systems where it's recognized that motor vehicle collisions may occur and the objective of roadway design or traffic management should help mitigate severity of outcomes of such incidents. Following the completion of these first 5 focus areas, preliminary recommendations were made and shared with internal stakeholders such as the engineering department, municipal enforcement and RCMP, transit, public works, and parks and recreation. The objective of the engagement was to report on any possible implications of recommendations on service levels from each area. And from the feedback, final recommendations were developed. Section 10 of the speed report highlights the final recommendations for the city speed limits, which were highlighted over this and the next slide. Related to the preliminary recommendations, they were included reducing neighborhood speeds from 50 kilometers to 40 kilometers per hour, increasing specific segments of the arterial network from 50 kilometers per hour to 60 kilometers per hour, with an additional segment on Meadowview Drive recommended to increase from 60 kilometers per hour to 70 kilometers per hour. It should be noted at this point that with the proposed or recommended speed increases, it was identified that recommendations to improve pedestrian crossings along these segments prior to any field implementation should occur as well. As an update to this, it should be noted that administration was successful in 2020 in performing upgrades of 4 crossings within the recommended sections, with only 2 crossings remaining of the proposed increased speed segments, that being on Dawson Road. Another recommendation was to remove 5 existing 30 kilometer per hour zones, 4 of which are on collector roadways within neighborhoods, and 1 located on the arterial road, Sturgeon Road. So it should be noted here that on the collector roadways and neighborhood roadways, they would be impacted and influenced by a reduction of speed. So the transition of speed would occur from 30 kilometers per hour existing to 40 kilometers per hour and not 50. Further recommendations involved areas targeting school and playground zones. 1 being converting existing elementary school zones to playground zones. 2, removal of 3 existing playground zones. And 3, setting a time of day to playground zones changing from the existing 8:30 a.m. to 1 hour after sunset to a daily 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. all year round. The previous information and recommendations were what had been presented to this committee and council in February of 2020, to which the direction from council involved administration performing public engagement on the recommendations. Administration, through a request for proposal, acquired the services of Politicos Research to perform the public engagement. Politicos assisted the city in this consultation process by compiling background information and messaging for the engagement, developing the survey, and receiving, compiling, and reporting back on the feedback. Politicos led the following work to obtain public and stakeholder feedback. A project website was developed with background information on video and a video on proposed speed changes with an FAQ and links for the survey and full speed report. This website and information was promoted through the city's social media and website as well. There were 2 surveys conducted, 1 online survey and 1 mail-out survey card. The survey was promoted again through the city's social media outlets, as well as local paper notification and city lights, and it was held from September 7th to October 2nd, 2020. A virtual town hall meeting was held on September 16th, 2020, and a virtual focus group meeting was held on September 23rd. The difference between the town hall was that a town hall was open to all general public. The virtual focus group meeting, however, was by invite only for committee representatives from such committees as the Community Services Advisory, the Seniors Advisory, Youth Advisory, the Policing Committee, and Environmental Advisory Committee. In terms of public involvement, there seemed to be a substantial level of response. There were approximately 3,862 visits to the project website, just over 3,000 online survey responses, just under 5,300 survey card responses. There was strong attendance from the committee representatives for the working group meeting, but there was lower attendance to the virtual town hall but the meeting was recorded and available for full viewing from the city website as well as the project website. It should be noted that the online survey card responses and the online survey and the card responses were not separated. And as identified in the public engagement report, the values of feedback received should not necessarily be summed up, as residents may have responded through both engagement actions. Although the results of the two formats of survey are not statistically identical, for the practical purposes, their results were very similar. In the agenda package, the average of the applicable was provided and shared. What did we hear with the public engagement? Well, as an attachment to the committee agenda package, the full public consultation report has been provided. As a general summary in the feedback received, responses on reducing neighborhood roads were the most contentious and split nearly 50-50, with a slightly higher rate being non-supportive of reduced speeds. Rationale on the non-support, or I guess the information provided by residents not supporting reduced speeds, identified that approximately 45% of those responding identified that reduction is not necessary and 50 kilometers per hour is felt to be slow enough, with minimal expectation that reduced speeds would actually influence safety. Another large portion, 20%, identified a disagreement that all neighborhood roads should be reduced, agreeing that local roads perhaps could be reduced, but identifying that a belief in the main collector roadway should remain at 50 kilometers per hour. Approximately 15% of comments also identified general city congestion and travel times as a concern with reducing speeds. Those responses supporting the speed reduction in neighborhoods in general did not leave further comment. However, some respondents did identify that they felt a stronger confidence of increased safety if speeds were reduced. The key target areas of engagement related to school and playground zones involved the conversion of elementary school zones to playground zones, the application of a change of time of day of playground zones to 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and the removal of 3 existing playground zones. Responses in general did not support the conversion of elementary school zones to playground zones, citing that such a change was not felt necessary and there would be an impact to major roadways, with an additional concern that school zones were actually better adhered to compared to playground zones. Second, responses were very near split on support of the playground zone time of day change, and a variance was found between the online survey, which could be explained with information available to be shared online compared to the survey card, where the survey card was not explicit and thus a higher support was found on the card compared to the online. In both survey formats, public comments did involve concerns with the seasonal factors of playgrounds and the impacts that they would have during winter months when usage is typically lower. And third, the feedback of removal of the 3 existing playground zones was largely supportive at 74%. There were site-specific concerns raised with a proposal that resulted in administration performing further review of the Atwood site. The received responses on increasing the proposed arterial segments were not surprisingly largely in favor, with support of those surveyed ranging from 82 to 90%. The most contentious was Sturgeon Road, with the lowest support value at 82%. In general, those opposed to the increases cited safety of pedestrians as a concern, along with general road safety, while the comment of consistency in posting roadway speeds was used by both those for and against the speed increases. Those in support of the amendments identified expected improvements in travel time and traffic flow. The suggested removal of existing slow zones or 30 kilometer per hour zones, again, was slightly different due to space constraints on the survey card compared to online survey. Where the online survey asked about the individual sites, the survey card requested a general agreement or disagreement with the removal of all 3 zones. For clarity in regards to the card, there was a reference and identification link back to the report and the website in anticipated hope that, I guess, residents would be able to review information prior to filling out the card. The feedback received online was overwhelmingly in favor, with 86 to 89% of support of removal, whereas the card surveys were less at 53% support. The final recommendations that have been developed based on public engagement, the feedback, as well as in taking into account the preliminary work of the engineering review. The following slides will provide the takeaway and final recommendations that have been informed through the review and public engagement. The first and likely most contentious, administration is recommending that neighborhood speeds be reduced from 50 kilometers per hour to 40 kilometers per hour. The key influences to this recommendations include the city's objective of Vision Zero, where no severe collision occurrences occur. It is identified that approximately 1/3 of citywide motor vehicle incidents are occurring on neighborhood roads. And although a higher volume of injury or severe collisions occur on the arterial network, the city experiences approximately 15% of severe incidents on neighborhood roadways. And over the past 3 years, this value is increasing, as it can be seen on this table. It is anticipated that speed can influence the likelihood of a collision, and a reduction can result in overall collision occurrence. But more so, speed is known to influence severity of collisions, and a reduction is very likely to have a positive influence to reduce injury probability. The results of the performed assessment of our collector and local roadways align to a posted speed of 40 kilometers per hour based on the transportation guidelines. This is again a direct action taken with the engineering review, where risk factors were investigated and detailed review performed of our actual network. It's related to the design considerations and operational considerations of the roadways that look at a variety of risk factors to propose a recommended speed, and is used as a Canadian standard of practice for setting posted speed limits. Further benefit is the consistency within the region, where recently the City of Edmonton has initiated the change of reducing their neighborhood roadways to 40 kilometers per hour. Although this recommendation is not derived from actions completed by the City of Edmonton, as we have completed our own internal and very specific review of our own transportation network, it is accounted that there is a benefit of regional implementation in messaging and communication of consistency for influence of road user behavior. One objective of administration is, of course, to incorporate as much resident feedback as possible into final recommendations. In regard to the reduction of neighborhood speeds, there was an overall response of just below 50% from those responding that desired reduction of speeds, meaning there was a near split without a substantial majority leaning one way or the other. The key influences identified in the previous slide are largely informing on the recommendation. However, with the survey, there were specific comments provided as to why residents identified opposition to the recommendations, to which 3 key areas were identified. One was travel time within communities and through the city was a concern and identified as a substantial issue with delay. With regards to the proposed reduction, the actual influence of travel time is negligible when considering that there are few communities that would require a substantial distance of travel, perhaps greater than 3 kilometers. For examples and reference, Erin Ridge Drive, the collector, is approximately 2.5 kilometers for the full length. Deer Ridge Drive is 2 kilometers, and La Rose Drive, for the full circle traveling the full distance of La Rose Drive, is approximately 2.1 kilometers. Assuming that a resident will travel a short distance on their local roadway, so this would be the crescent or cul-de-sac or whatnot, and connect to the collector and to travel to their arterial destination, then an average distance may equate to less than 3 kilometers, but for the purposes of review, assuming that it was a 3 kilometer drive and distance of traveling within that community, the change in time is an additional 1 minute and 6 seconds. A second comment was that those opposed to the overall reduction of speeds agreed that local roadways may be appropriate for speed reduction, but not the collector roadways. This is an understandable considering that the large volume of residents live on the local network compared to the number of residents living directly on the collector roadway, and the design of the 2 roadways in comparison to one another. And although this may be considered a fair request to have collectors and local roadways posted separately, there are key issues to consider. One, the collector roadway serves a similar function of that of a local, where residents live directly off of the collector with front accesses, and the collector actually operates with higher volumes and possible conflict in comparison to that local roadway. The amount of infrastructure that would be required to sign the posted speeds in neighborhoods with the varying, if the roadways were posted at separate speeds, would be substantial. Signs are required to be placed wherever a variance or change occurs in the speed limit, meaning that a sign would be required entering onto the local roadway as well as a sign for each direction of travel coming off of each local roadway onto the collector. So at each intersection, there would be additional signage and infrastructure required to support the notification of the speed changes. In addition to the clutter of infrastructure that this would cause, the cost of the signage are estimated to be at least 5 times that of the funds needed to sign a neighborhood with maintaining collectors and locals of the same speed. Further, separating locals and collectors through different speed limits may create driver confusion and further adherence concerns. As a result of these considerations, administration is not recommending that the proposed speed limit be changed or applied only to local roads and instead be applied to both collectors and locals together. A third comment expressed during the public engagement was an opinion that reducing speed limits would not influence safety. It is a common industry knowledge that vehicle speed influences the severity of a collision. The graphic on the left of this slide compares the expected impacts as a comparison of person falling to a vehicle and a pedestrian collision. The top right graphic identifies the severity outcomes expected in motor vehicle collisions, where the risk of fatality during a pedestrian collision rises from approximately 30% at 40 kilometers per hour to just over 60% at 50 kilometers per hour. In St. Albert, from 2015 to 2019, approximately 1/3 of motor vehicle collisions occur annually within neighborhood roads. From this time frame, there were a total of 1,595 collisions on community roadways, with a total of 171 severe incidents. And the trend from 2015 to 2019 is not a lowering number of severe collisions, but an increasing number, where 8 to 15% of these neighborhood collisions are resulting in severe outcomes. Some feedback and one general understood opinion is that the focus of the city should be around the arterial roadways based upon collision numbers and severe incident occurrences. So really blunt, larger volumes and frequency of collisions are occurring on the arterial network and more severe outcomes are occurring. However, with a frequency of collisions occurring, one must account and consider the traffic volumes and demands of the roadways. Arterial roadways are substantially higher volume roadways in comparison to collector and far higher than any local roadway. The traffic volumes ultimately influence the probability and risk of collisions. And for clarity, various initiatives are required to achieve the objective of the city and the goal of Vision Zero. The influence of speed and reduction on neighborhood roads is one action in a variety that must include engineering, education, enforcement, and ongoing evaluation. Actions to improve priority conflict areas on the arterial network are part of the safety plan and network-wide improvements that are in process. Beyond the social and community impact motor vehicle collisions have, there are direct and indirect financial costs. In 2018, the Capital Region Intersection Safety Partnership, CRISP, to which St. Albert is a member, performed an update to a study identifying the costs associated with motor vehicle collisions. Direct costs are inclusive of a tangible or largely understood costs that are directly linked to a collision, such as the property damage costs, emergency service costs, medical expenses, legal costs, travel delay, and costs associated with lost time from the workplace. Further considerations of human capital costs are focused around the associated with a future net production of individuals that is lost to society as a result of a collision. And then there's a willingness to pay cost, where costs are associated with for what society is willing to pay to prevent or reduce the risks associated with occurrence of collisions, particularly collisions that result in severe injury or fatality. For the purposes of this presentation, only the direct costs have been highlighted on this slide to represent the financial impacts and costs of motor vehicle collisions that have occurred on St. Albert neighborhood roads. So these are not inclusive of arterial roadway collisions from a time period of 2012 to 2019. Over this 8-year time frame, an estimated total of just under $41 million based on that 2018 study of collision costs have come as a result of costs of collisions occurring on local and collector roadways in St. Albert. And as can be seen from the table, the percentage of collisions, again, that are resulting in severe incidents are increasing on neighborhood roads, up approximately 10% from 2015 to 2019. Moving on from the neighborhood roadways, the recommendations around school and playground zones include: 1, maintain elementary school zones as school zones and do not convert to playground zones. This stems from recognition that the provincial guidelines had to be modified slightly from the preliminary recommendations, which could create inconsistency. There are also considerations of operational impacts to transit services, and this proposed change was not desired by those of the community responding to the survey. Second recommendation is establish a time of day for playground zones that is seasonal. That would be daily from 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. from April 1st to October 31st of the calendar year. Administration recommends this is only considered if council were supportive of reducing neighborhood speeds. Should speed limits in neighborhoods be maintained at 50 kilometers per hour or the reduction not approved or supported, administration would recommend that playground zones be implemented daily from 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. all year round. This is just to provide additional consideration of safety for vulnerable road users in and around the playground zones, recognizing the difference of transitioning from the 30 kilometers per hour to 40 in comparison to what if the speed reduction did not occur, 30 kilometers per hour to 50 kilometers per hour in these zones. And finally, administration is also recommending the removal of 2 out of the 3 preliminary suggested playground zone removals, recommending to remove the Forest Drive zone and the Dearborn Drive South zone. These are recommended for removal, again, in consideration of the neighborhood speeds being approved, supported, and should the reduction not be supported, administration would recommend maintaining these playground zones. The Atwood Drive location is actually recommended to be maintained upon further review of the site in comparison to the warrant criteria. For clarity, the proposed bylaw, the red line version or documents that you have in your agenda package, identify updates only aligned to the recommended time of day for playground zones. The other 2 areas involving school zones and the site-specific playground zones are field changes only and not directly identified within the traffic bylaw. So what it boils down to is that council provides support or approval in any posted speed limits outside of playground zones or school zones. The school zone setup and playground setups are administrative in process, and we follow now, the recommendation is following those provincial guidelines for applying such zones. With regard to the proposed increases in arterial speeds, administration is recommending that the noted segments are increased with a provision that pedestrian improvements are completed prior to the segments being adjusted in the field. In 2020, as identified, 4 pedestrian improvements were completed at the crossings of Belrose Drive at El Dorado, Sir Winston Churchill Avenue at Gatewood, and 2 crossings on Sir Winston Churchill Avenue at Grandin Village accesses. Sturgeon Road pedestrian improvements occurred in 2019. Remaining crosswalks to address with improvements include the 2 pedestrian crossings on Dawson Road. And when I comment on the improvements, it's adjusting the pedestrian crossings to utilize warning flashers to give drivers advance notice and recognition to appropriately yield to pedestrians. One additional segment that has been recommended within the bylaw update is for a speed increase is the portion of Poirier Avenue from Sir Winston Churchill Avenue to Campbell Road. This section is being recommended to be increased from 50 kilometers per hour to 60 kilometers per hour and is based upon the engineering evaluation as well as general comments and feedback received during the public engagement. The preliminary evaluation and recommendations did not capture the segment due to initial concerns of the possible change in conversion from Poirier Avenue to Corvu. So as you transition and cross Campbell Road, Poirier changes into Corvu. And right now, because of lack of sidewalk infrastructure and active mode accommodation, Corvu would not be recommended to change. However, as the active transportation program or improvements are considered and possibly applied to Corvu Avenue, that segment of roadway could be considered to be increased as well in future bylaw amendment considerations. In terms of, there is an additional site as well on Poirier Avenue, to which it's recommended and caught within the 2021 Transportation Network Improvement Program to address the pedestrian crossing at Poirier Avenue and Pineview Drive. So in line with the previous recommendations of addressing pedestrian crossing concerns or improvements, this site would be recommended, is anticipated to be completed in 2021 as well. In terms of the slow zones or the 30 kilometers per hour, it is recommended that all sites be removed. It should be noted that 2 of the locations, one being on Cunningham Road from Sycamore to Stanley, and 2, second site on Sturgeon Road from Burn Street to Bishop Street, would be considered in line with a 50 kilometers per hour posted speed limit. The other 4 remaining sites are located within communities and would be subject to the recommended reduced speed of 40 kilometers per hour. So the adjustment and the proposed recommendations of removal do not result in the speed limit going posted above 40 kilometers per hour if consideration and support is identified with the reduced neighborhood speeds. There are other areas of targeted for update within this proposed bylaw change, and they involve required regulations or requested changes from the province as related to the city's dangerous goods routing. The city had previously deleted a Schedule 6 as it relates to time-limited dangerous goods, and the province has communicated directly with the city administration to request document references or definitions be removed within the bylaw. All recommendations associated with the dangerous goods align to direct feedback and review of Alberta Transportation as related to dangerous goods. In a second area, the city has also in the past had guidelines on school bus operations that were developed in conjunction with school transportation representatives and focused on restricting usage of local roadways. With no reference in the bylaw, these guidelines were not necessarily enforceable, and it is recommended to add these sections. It should be noted that school transportation groups may continue to request the use of local roadways should they have specific user needs, or their routes may be impacted by lack of connectivity or temporarily by construction. However, the improvements or the bylaw amendments just result in a requirement for an application and a permit from the city engineer. And finally, there is a section within Part 52 that references a special event signage that had previously been deleted in other areas of the bylaw document. And this one section is still remaining and should be removed for clarity. To implement the suggested changes to the bylaw, it is recommended that pedestrian crossing improvements be completed along the corridor of Dawson Road that is inclusive of 2 pedestrian crossings. Administration has also completed just for clarity again, administration has completed pedestrian crossings at the other corridor sites along Somerset Churchill Avenue and Belrose Drive through alternative programs, and the Poirier Avenue site is planned for construction in 2021. Additional cost considerations are funding required to complete field signage changes for the posted speed limits, changing existing 50 kilometer per hour signs, as well as consideration of additional signs where speed limits may transition from arterial roadways to communities, and then signage required to give notice of the time of day and changes to possible playground zones. With the proposed funding, there are costs associated also with public messaging and promoting any approved changes to the bylaw. It's anticipated that typical resources of public messaging would be used by the city's social media streams and city lights. However, due to the impact and influence of the changes, it's recommended that a communications plan be established and applied that may use additional field signs, local paper spots, facility signage, and messaging. The total estimated cost of the work is $230,000, and it is recommended that funding be used from the Traffic Safety Reserve. This reserve account had approximately $232,000 at the end of November 2020. Before the committee this afternoon are the following recommendations, with acknowledgement that the speed study report and other background information had been shared with council and the committee during the original network review presentations. It is recommended that the value of funds requested to complete work be captured in the recommendations with a condition that funds are only approved upon final approval of bylaw amendments. This is due to the fact that final amendments to the bylaw will influence the associated costs of implementation. And with that, I'm glad, I appreciate everyone's patience as I went through. That was a long presentation, but I'm happy now to take on any questions.
Thank you, Dean. Yeah, thanks for unsharing your screen so I can see everybody now. So I'll just open it up for questions. It looks like Mayor Herron's up first and Councillor Watkins.
Yeah, I can start. I'm sure there's lots of questions. So first of all, Dean, that presentation was very informative. You answered a lot of my questions. As I mentioned, I threw this on Facebook yesterday, got some feedback. So I'm just going to go through some of those questions that actually I didn't have answers for that sparked some good questions. And then some that I thought of myself. With regards to neighborhood roads going from 50 to 40. So Edmonton has implemented this. What other municipalities in the region are considering it, or do you know?
So there, right now, when we did the review in 2019, I can bring this up and get the specifics, but there were only a couple that actually had implemented at that time. It was before Edmonton had applied it. So we were looking at, I believe, Beaumont and maybe Westlock had reduced neighborhood speeds. But a great deal of information received was that communities were looking at it, very interested in the work that St. Albert was doing and what the city of Edmonton had been doing around the same time. And so they were definitely, they may not have applied it, but for the most part, over 75% of those responding to our survey to agencies identified interest if they hadn't already applied reduced speeds.
Okay, but Beaumont has as well?
I believe so. In terms of the area, I believe Beaumont has reduced speeds to date.
Okay. And of course, as you very well know, Erin Ridge is already permanently at 40 and a section of Lacombe. Do we have, I use the word data in my question, but are there any data on any how it's going, if it's changing any collision rates? Might be too early, or any feedback from Erin Ridge residents on that change? I think it's been about a year now, so I'm just wondering how that's going, I guess.
Right. So we do have some preliminary information, and what I can do is try to share my screen again here. Let's try this. And so I just would sorry, that's Linux. I would just caution and say that it is fairly early. So in terms of collision reporting, we're typically 1 year behind. So we're just finalizing right now. And this is related to actual provincial reports and whatnot that come in and the timelines associated with kind of validating information and quantifying it and then kind of getting it back out there. So we're just in process now of finalizing 2019 collision information. And information will be made, fact sheets made public, in Q1 here of 2021. So we're a little bit behind in regards to having up to date necessarily kind of information, but I mean, we're seeing a general, like, I guess, some volumes potentially have increased on some of the roadways. The overall, at the top of the screen, you can see Erin Ridge is the larger area for where we're kind of focused on right now. We're seeing an overall, like a reduction, from let's just say, I guess it's down from a year, but I would be very hesitant to suggest that we would be looking at maybe the annual trends. It's best to maybe look at a 3 to 5 year trend compared to a kind of a knee-jerk reaction of a single year. So they are lower, but I wouldn't emphasize that to a degree to say it's success yet.
And I guess maybe council would know the public opinion of that more than you, but so I won't put you on the spot with that one. So those changes in Erin Ridge are already incorporated into our traffic bylaw, correct?
Correct. Yeah,
So,
we made that change in 2019.
Yeah. So the interesting question is, if let's say council decided not to go with the rest of the city, would your department recommend moving Erin Ridge back up to 50? Because that would be a really inconsistent piece of our traffic bylaw if we didn't do the whole city.
Yeah, I believe that administration would recommend that to ensure there was consistency and consideration of the network, we would revert back to the communities that were deemed essentially in 2019 as pilot project areas for reduced speeds, would look at it more holistically as the network again.
Just an opinion, my correspondence from the public has been general, quite accepting of that change, especially because it was brought on by the Erin Ridge Traffic Calming Committee. So yeah, that it was well received. Let's talk about, I might jump around, so I apologize, but the removal of the 30 slow zones, Mr. Matthews actually has brought up something that I was concerned about. Morgan Park is a well-used soccer field for the little guys. I think there's a small little parking lot there, but I have a little bit of concerns, and I would think you did too, because I know how much you care about safety on our roads. So you're suggesting removal of the 30, but only if the entire area goes to 40. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Right.
And this is out of the vast majority of the current slow zones, as we call the 30-kilometer-per-hour zones, are on neighborhood roadways. So in consideration with their removal, I would highly suggest that council consider the reduced neighborhood speeds. And this is where the recommendations of the bylaw really kind of would fall in line with, you know, everything being looked at together, and considering all the recommendations as one. So in that area in particular, the recommendation, the slow zones, each of them, just for council or this committee's consideration, is that the engineering group investigated each individual site based on the transportation guidelines, the posted speed guidelines. And in recognition of those outcomes of the guidelines actually saying that the reduced speeds were not aligned, it doesn't, I mean, one of the issues and one of the benefits of us doing the city-wide review is that we now have documentation of the investigation and the factors and the criteria and whatnot being applied to come to the rationale to support the recommended speeds. I can't at this moment say what actually influenced that reduction on Mission Avenue in Morgan, if it were at some point aligned with a playground use, if it was aligned to resident request, or there's nothing definitive from an engineering perspective stating why that was reduced.
So if if committee pushes this on to council and it's approved as is presented today, are we planning, you have $150,000 in for pedestrian improvements. Is there a crosswalk going in at that bend on Mission Ave? Because
No, so the one thing, I mean, for one, I don't think a pedestrian crossing, even with a 30-kilometer zone, would be necessarily recommended for right there, because it's mid-block and it's a tough area to accommodate a pedestrian with the driveways and accesses and whatnot in that area. We do have a crossing located kind of southeast, depending on how you're looking at St. Albert, because nothing can be true north-south here. But at St. Vital, there is an existing crossing that will be operating or is operating already with warning flashers. There's an additional pedestrian crossing at the north end at Morgan Crescent as well on Mission Avenue that right now is just a standard pedestrian crossing with signs, but we have a city-wide process going on and program that council has been very supportive of in improving pedestrian crossings, and this would be one of the sites, and could be taken into account for the prioritization, the influence and the change in that area of the speed zone.
yeah, because I think right at the bend is the entrance to the soccer field. So
right.
I think that would be an important one. So Cunningham Road, we're moving over to Paul Kane and Leo Nickerson now. So there's a school zone there. I think it goes pretty much from the pool all the way to the other side of Nickerson. Your suggested changes would turn Nickerson into, let's keep it as a school zone, but it would be till 8 p.m., correct?
No, so just
Okay,
for clarity, and this is actually, I've had discussions with some, it is a little confusing because we had the preliminary recommendations and final recommendations. Yeah. So at the end of this, the final recommendations ultimately result in no change to school zones. So existing school zones would stay as they are, and time of day 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. on school days only. In this case, your specific question of site, Cunningham Road is school zones. So technically speaking, there would be no proposed changes to Cunningham with, of course, I got to say, at the exception of that 30-kilometer-per-hour zone removal, but the school zones remain as are without any change. The only changes are aligned to playground zones.
Okay.
With time of day and the removal of the two sites.
Right. So the playground at Leo Nickerson School will be a school zone, and so after 4 p.m. you can go 50 kilometers an hour, even though it's a playground there.
So this again subject to final approval or so right now, if no further changes were made, it would stay as a school zone. It would be 30 kilometers per hour on school days, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And that's it.
Right.
If these changes, if all the recommendations were advanced by council, then what would happen is it would still be a school zone, 8 a.m., 30 kilometers per hour, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. on school days only. Sycamore, being the collector roadway, would be 40 kilometers per hour. Cunningham would be 50 kilometers per hour.
Okay. I did get a question about why we would maybe not consider making the school zones 7 a.m. because the kids are standing, waiting for buses, etc., and moving. The pedestrian movements start before 8 a.m. So any comment there?
Yeah, so we did engage with school boards as well as specific school sites. And I got to be honest here. For one thing, school boards and whatnot had a lot of other things going on in 2020 that they were trying to address. So I don't think anyone was dropping everything to respond to our survey. But those that actually responded identified that they desired just the times that are applied today are appropriate for their school operations. And one thing that we kind of looked at when we were doing reviews, we found that some of these sites, again, a lot of our school sites are located on collector roadways. So the school sites themselves may not be generating the actual movement of pedestrians and activity in and around them, but the school transportation system is. And this is happening on all our collectors, inside school zones and outside school zones, because all these kids are walking and getting picked up by their school buses on these collector roadways. So it looks like a lot of activity in and around these times, but some of these school sites are not really active. It's just the actual transportation network itself being active at that time. And these sites, these considerations would again be influenced by reduced neighborhood speeds. So it wouldn't be a reduction to 30 kilometers per hour, but they would be reduced to 40 kilometers per hour subject to approved bylaw amendments.
Okay. Somebody asked me, will the flashing school signs remain? I assume that is true.
Yeah, we will maintain the school flashers. Any new school sites will have them applied. It's kind of a standard now that we've set for the city, an unwritten standard.
They're excellent. All right, there's an intersection close to where I live. It's Belrose and Evergreen / Oak Vista. Couple years ago, I think you and I communicated about a warrant study to get a pedestrian crossing in there. It's there now, so thank you for that. But now, if we actually if we increase the speed on Belrose from can't remember what the street ahead is, where you're proposing.
Sorry.
Yeah, so okay, what's the name of the street?
So the increase on Belrose is from the North City limit to linking into the county to Evergreen.
Evergreen, right. So that's going to increase the speed of cars, and there's also been increased traffic in that area because of the shutting down of Coal Mine Road. And it is getting difficult to turn left onto Belrose, whatever direction you're going. So not so much there wasn't as much concern about the speed change. There was more question about when was the last warrant study done about a full intersection upgrade at that location. And I don't know, Dean, if you want to get back to me in an IR on that, or
yeah, absolutely. What I may say is maybe beneficial because we got influenced with the 2020 programming in terms of our traffic counts and kind of COVID responses and whatnot. That 2021 will be starting our program up, and I'll share with council right now that we can investigate that site with updated traffic counts, maybe the best response.
Okay, so we're looking for 2021 data. Yeah, I'll get that back to the president. Two more guys, and then I'll move it over. Meadowview, it's a very short little section that's within our jurisdiction that you want to take up to 80, 70? 70, thank you. What is it in the county?
There are it goes, I believe there's a segment that is up to 70, and then there's a slower zone of 60, and they kind of transition in different areas as well. So I believe as you go further west, I can get, maybe the best answer would be is I get back to you with what those.
I'm assuming you work with our neighbors when you set speed limits so that you're not jumping around. And it's such a small piece, I'm not gonna worry about it. The last one is Poirier between Sir Winston and Cunningham. When this first came to us, we all talked about that and we all kind of agreed that that would make sense to, 50 does seem very slow. But the fact that it wasn't one of the original proposals means that there wasn't probably as much public input because it wasn't there. So, but you said in your presentation that there was a lot of public input on Poirier, but so this question wasn't specifically asked, but you feel that the public engagement did lean towards increasing the speed there?
Yeah, a lot of comments, or not a lot, I mean, again, in relevance, it was a repeated comment.
Okay.
Kind of seeking information on Poirier and the possible increase. From an administrative point of view, we having the engineering review. I'm confident that the lack of risk factors exists along that roadway. The largest rationale that administration had in not recommending it initially was the fact that transition from Poirier to Corvu. But in now kind of further review and consideration, knowing that it's a link to Campbell Road and the possible diversion and routing of traffic and even pedestrians in that area, it's suitable that the two can operate with individual kind of speed zones. And knowing as well that in the forthcoming capital project plans, Corvu will be identified for improving active transportation. We finished, it's no secret that in 2020, we completed a segment of sidewalk already from Campbell Road to Carnegie Drive to link Service Place. So, active mode accommodation has already started on Corvu Avenue, which is one of the biggest factors as to why Corvu is recommended as 50 in comparison to 60.
Because people are riding their bikes around on the road.
That's and walking. Yes, yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Chair Hansen, can I have one more? Ray Gibbon Drive. It's designed to be faster than 70 kilometers an hour. Is that correct?
Yeah, no. Typical practice is for roadways to be designed. That's kind of a safety net in terms of if a roadway is designed at 80 and posted at 70, that's pretty typical for roadways. I mean, there's usually a 10-kilometer variance, or it was a standard practice anyways for quite some time, and is largely a consideration. Now, with Ray Gibbon Drive in particular, however, with environmental concerns, with wildlife and whatnot, and with the EIA that was conducted in 2003, it was specifically identified that the corridor itself should not be considered to be posted higher than 70 kilometers per hour.
Okay. So it's more for wildlife than pedestrian, because as we twin with beautiful active pedestrian accommodations with sidewalks and trails alongside, I thought maybe we could move towards 80 as it grows. But if it's for wildlife, then I get that.
Yeah, at this point in time, the roadway, to be fair, the roadway is designed at 9 with the improvements as per the agreement with the province. The roadway's designed at 90 kilometers per hour and posted at 70. And again, it's largely around the wildlife. Now, in consideration that future, maybe something comes down the line in terms of cost beneficial wildlife preventative or mitigation measures, that could be a consideration. But we are in process right now of looking at phase 2 of Ray Gibbon widening. And at this point in time, there's considerations of wildlife mitigation measures, and they're for substantial degree of protection. It is quite costly and quite the consideration. So with the environmental permitting and considerations right now, it's still recommended to be maintained at 70 kilometers per hour.
That's all my questions, at least for now.
Thanks, Mayor. Over to Councillor Watkins, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Did you say that in the public, sorry, that was a lot of information. So most of my questions are clarification about things that you said and some stuff on the slides. So did you say that the residents wanted it on collector roadways? That was what the feedback said?
There was about 20% So just for clarity, in and around, I believe on the card survey, it was about 43% of support for reducing neighborhood speeds. On the online survey, it was 47. It averaged out to about 45% overall. And out of those that were opposed, 20% thereabouts of those opposed identified that they could support reduced speeds on neighborhood roads, but not, on local roads, but not collector roadways.
Sorry, that percentage was again?
It was thereabouts 20%.
Oh, 20%, okay. And the 1.6 minute time was based on, did you say 3 kilometers of either local or collector roadway travel before you get an arterial road?
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, and just for it's 1 minute and 6 seconds. So one.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's correct. Yeah, for both roadways, 3 kilometers.
And where did you get that 3 kilometers from? That was just some data, or was that based on St. Albert?
No, it was based on St. Albert. I kind of just did a quick review of kind of a collector lengths to say what would be an average length. I mean, there may be longer, there may be shorter trips.
Yeah, it seemed like a lot to me, actually. It seemed like I wouldn't travel 3 kilometers in St. Albert before I got on an arterial road.
Yeah, I would.
That was a pretty liberal. Okay. And then the Mission Road section, that is the removal of a 30-kilometer zone?
Correct.
And are we removing all of the 30-kilometer zones within the entire city, so there'll be no more 30-kilometer zones?
For the most part, the short segments, so of the permanent 30-kilometer per hour zones are recommended for removal. Of course, I just want to be cautious here to make sure, like, in terms of playground zones and school zones and whatnot, those are 30 kilometers per hour and those are specific to zone sites. But these little segments are recommended for removal.
So the ones that aren't associated with playgrounds or school zones are being removed. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
But the one on Mission appears to be connected with a playground. Or a park,
in following the provincial guidelines for applying playground zones, the site does not meet the requirements of the guidelines to recommend a playground zone. So at this point in time,
so that was provincial guidelines. Provincial guidelines do not recommend it as a playground zone?
No, that's right. In applying the guidelines themselves. And the other consideration is that the 30-kilometer per hour zone was just set up, and you may notice that in the bylaw, we identify what a playground zone is, we identify the reduction of speed, but there's nowhere in the bylaw that states specifically where playground zones or school zones exist. That's not really up to at the governance level for council to approve those zones. We as administration follow the recommendations of applying the zones. And so, but in this site in particular, there was no playground zone signage or attributed to the site.
And the provincial definition of what is a 30-kilometer zone, is that based on activity in the area, or is that based on designation of MR, or what is that kind of based on?
No, it's based on essentially about 6 criteria, and they're very similar between school zones and playground zone. And so it's, the type of playground structure. So there's green space, actual field, playground structures. In schools, it's relevant to the type of school. So whether it's elementary, junior high, or high school. There's the size of the structure itself, its proximity to the roadway, whether there's sidewalk on one side, both sides, or no sides of the roadway, fencing. And then in each of these sites, roadways are reviewed individually. So whether the roadway is attributed to a main access, a side access to the playground area, or a site or school site. And then the type of roadway is the final factor that's reviewed. So whether it's an arterial, a collector, or a local.
Okay, so on Morgan Park, once again, I'm just trying to flesh this out a bit more. The only kind of infrastructure that it seems to be on there is sandboxes, a couple of sandboxes. But the mayor was talking, or somebody suggested they play a lot of kids soccer on there. Yeah, so I have it just, so I'm not ignoring everyone and trying to be rude by turning my head, but I got on another screen. I'm kind of looking at the same area. So 2 little sand squares there, it looks like. That's it. Yeah, there is a play structure Yes.
There's a green field, but no sports equipment is on site. So again, in recognition of sports fields, we have some where we would have soccer or baseball pitches or soccer fields or whatnot kind of set up. That would be taken into account, but being that it's just a green field, it can be used for whatever. I mean, anyone can go out there and do whatever they want to legally, but if they're doing, if they're going out and kicking the ball around, so be it. It's just not designated as a soccer.
But if it was being used by St. Alfred Soccer Association as a soccer facility for youth, then would it have to have goalposts? Then it would be probably in a different category.
Yes, then it would have different infrastructure that would be related to the criteria and reevaluated. And
okay, well, we should probably check that out because that's what the mayor said, and see if St. Albert Soccer Association uses it as part of one of their fields for youth. And if that's the case, then we could maybe we could change the designation to 30.
They use it for the little guys, the U4s and U6s that come with the little collapsible nets. That's what they use it for.
Okay, and you also said there was no doubt that I thought I heard you say there was no doubt that reduced speed causes less crashes. And you showed the graph and went like this.
Right.
40. So 40 to 50, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so industry knowledge states that speed will influence the probability of a collision as well as the severity of a collision.
Okay. And then sorry, I had a lot of questions too. And there was a lot of information. And then the dollar value for collisions, you had that number at that. Was that 40 million or 30 million?
It was just around 41 million, just under 41
a year worth of collisions.
No, that was from 2012 to 2019.
2012 to 2000. So that was the cost. 2012, 2019, 7 years. So 40 million over 7 years. So it's like 5 million a year, 5.5 million a year, something like that.
Correct. And that was, just for clarity, just on local road, like neighborhood roadways as well, not arterial.
Local and collector.
That's correct. Yeah. And also just direct costs. So again, I kind of highlighted that there were other considerations of society's willingness to pay.
Right. So you're talking about trees getting knocked over, signage getting busted up, sidewalks cracked.
Yeah, and like the vehicles and
services, all those kind of things, right?
That's correct.
And those numbers, those values that you got, where did you say you got those from again?
So the unit rates are taken from the 2018 cost of collision study performed by the Capital Region Intersection Safety Partnership, CRISP. So it's local costs.
Local costs.
It's a local Edmonton region. I mean, it's a joint partnership between City of Edmonton, St. Albert, Strathcona. All the
so we're very comfortable with those costs. They're not some U.S. study from far away or anything. They're big numbers and they're real numbers.
That's correct.
Okay, and then I think I already asked you this question. Did you say we were removing all the 30-kilometer-per-hour zones that weren't associated with a school zone or a park? Or
yeah, I just would, if it's okay, and what I'll do is have a quick look to check. There's a red line version of the bylaw. I just want to check and make sure that there's not an existing 30 kilometers. So I believe we've caught the vast majority of these small segment slow zones.
Okay.
But just, I don't want to look you in the eye and lie to you over virtual here. So I don't have the bylaw right in front of me.
and Poirier, the increase in traffic on Poirier, was that supported by the residents? I can't recall what you said about that.
So to the mayor's comment, there was not a specific request or identification to increase at the original preliminary recommendations. We weren't recommending increasing Poirier due to that consideration of the transition of Poirier to Corvu. And in St. Albert, we have a few sites where you cross, for example, Hebert to Gervais, there's a speed change. And we want to minimize that network wide. And we knew entering into it that Poirier, from the engineering review applying the TAC guidelines, it was recommended as a 60 kilometers per hour, but Corvu is recommended as 50. And it's largely because of, on Corvu, the lack of pedestrian infrastructure.
Okay, I remember that now. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. Over to Councillor Mackay and then Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you. You can clearly tell by the amount of questions that this can be the whole subject of setting speed limits in a community can be certainly polarizing. And looking at all of your public engagement in your survey and your presentation today, Mr. Schick, congratulations, well done. The information is certainly detailed and much appreciative. I've got a couple of questions and then on process, and most of them have been asked. Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councillor Watkins. And I would also encourage members to go on the City of Edmonton traffic safety webpage. They actually have a online estimated time of arrival tool that you can plan your trip just to see the impact that a reduced speed limit will actually have. So to your questions, Councillor Watkins, you can actually plot in your time and it will factor in your speed limits. And I'm not suggesting we do that, but I'm just suggesting that for many of the residents who opposed the speed limit reductions, I'm sure most of them were around the fact that it would impact travel times, and in addition to the fact that it could also be a gravy train for us and our photo radar, which I don't support. I just want to go back to the comment that was made at the mayor's question around on her Facebook page around modifying the hours for school zones. And could we potentially go back to the school boards now that they're back? I mean, I understand maybe their reluctance in relation to the travel, and your comment was good, but I mean, also for many parents, they're bringing their kids there. A lot of people are getting ready. There's a lot of activities that are already starting around schools earlier than 8 or 8, you know. So I'm wondering, is there a way to gather a little bit more feedback from that? Because I'm certainly, you know, thinking that if we can modify that by maybe starting it earlier, if the data supports it, then why wouldn't we?
Councillor Mackay, I'm just going to jump in as chair, and I apologize for that, but I actually did reach out to the school boards over the weekend, and I got a response from G Sacred, who said that anything that promotes more safety, and that would be a lengthened hour, they would actually be okay with the school zones being under the playground times, because just for safety for kids before and after school. And and they indicated that they didn't recall getting questions being directly asked to them. I understand that it was a busy year for them, but so I think there is maybe a little room for engagement there.
Good. Well, that's good. I mean, I don't want to delay the process, but I think that there's an opportunity, and I don't see on the other end of the school time frame, because most school zones clear out by 4. That's half the problem. But certainly, I think the morning start time could be adjusted if the data supports it. The other question I have that relates to the speed increases on Dawson and then also on Poirier. There's a couple of crosswalks or intersections there that I think perhaps may justify enhanced safety measures, potentially. I'm thinking of the one I'm on, Poirier, the most, and I'm thinking, you know, as you go into the Pine View community or Kingswood on the one side, there is just a crosswalk there. I know we've just put a new enhanced intersection lights on Parkwood and just by the church, and that seems to be well utilized. But I would wonder about increasing the speed limit and then having just an unprotected crosswalk. Have we looked at that in Poirier and then again in Dawson?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the prioritization of pedestrian crossing improvements, the pedestrian crossing on Poirier at Pineview was identified for 2021 for the improvement. So we are actually prepared, and through the recent budget approval process, through the Transportation Systems Management Program, had identified funds to improve that pedestrian crossing on Poirier. And so that work is anticipated to begin. And the Dawson Road improvements, however, though, they were not as high on the priority listing, and thus prior to any field changes of speed changes, we'd recommend the pedestrian crossing improvements be performed on Dawson, which are for 2 sites, and hence why the request for funds to perform these improvements prior to any changes.
Thanks, I appreciate that additional comment. The other question in relation to, and I think you've said that one of the reasons you didn't want to have you know, a 50 on collector and 40s only on neighborhood was just consistency around that. I'm aware that in some communities, Vancouver, Toronto, they look at reduced speed limits in their high density areas. Is it just primarily around the consistency and the cost in relation to having signage that would have multiple changes? And just maybe for the members of council, a lot of reasons you don't have if that's 60, you have to have a 50 sign, but you don't need 50 signs everywhere else because that's basically our default speed limit. And I'm assuming that would happen if we went to a 40-kilometer speed limit, correct, Dean?
That's correct.
But so just going back to my initial question would be just around, could we look at, so for those, did you look at in your studies what some of the experiences were in other communities around specific areas?
No, being where we kind of investigated and the feedback that we got for communities, there weren't that many, again, that had actually applied reduced speeds at that time. I think now, of course, with City of Edmonton going through this process, we'd be able to collaborate a little bit with them more so, and get possible again to align whatever our needs are, whatever the final recommendations are, if there are any changes implemented, what they're doing, so that regional benefit as well in regards to how we sign things and communicate to our drivers. The considerations for recommending not to separate the locals and collectors stem from kind of 3 key areas. One being overall sign clutter for one thing. 2 is, again, there is kind of a requirement or anticipated need based on what our administration's understanding on in regard to signing speed limits wherever there's a change. And so, you know, if you have locals, that's a substantial amount of signs, as you would, in our view, we anticipated needing signage for every possible change. So whether you could change from a 50 onto a 40 or 40 coming onto a 50, you need signs for all directions of travel to post that speed limit. And in St. Albert here, we're a beautiful botanic city, and we got concerns just placing one sign and visibility and awareness to see that sign with our fantastic, until we start posting signs directly onto the tree trunks, it's going to be a bit of an issue. So with the overall clutter and infrastructure needed for that, that was a consideration as well. And the influence that has on the aesthetics of a community. And then 2, costs. We did just a very quick estimate using the communities of Erin Ridge, where we actually applied the speed reduction. And it was found that the cost to post the speed separate from collectors to locals is in and around just over 5 times the cost of the way that we actually applied it, where we have that standard speed. Like you said, if you have a default speed, you can post it at one spot and at the entrances into a community, and that's the infrastructure you need. Now, as you travel off the collector onto local, speed limits don't change, and so you're okay, you don't need signs. The additional costs would be at sites right now. I'll use the example of Sir Winston Churchill, going into communities like the Grandin community or Heritage Lakes. In areas where it is 50 kilometers per hour now and you go into 50, there may be locations that there aren't 50 because you should be traveling 50 on the arterial into the community. So there's not even signs right there. So in terms of if the changes are implemented, we would have changing the existing 50 signs as well as considerations for new sites.
And last question, Chair Hansen. Is this, did I read in the background, or, and I apologize if maybe I was just maybe looking too far back. Is there a requirement for another public hearing? Was that February 16th?
So we recommend it. We've done this as in the past with every proposed bylaw amendment. We typically recommend a non-statutory public hearing. And so it just gives opportunity again. It's, to my knowledge, David may want to kind of jump in here and or hit my mute to stop me from talking, but I believe that it is not statutory, and it's just recommended for further engagement, just to capture people's attention and provide an opportunity for residents to provide input.
I was just trying to find the date that I wanted to be sick. That's all. I'm joking. I'm teasing. The amount of engagement that you've done on this is remarkable, and you can tell by the responses that is obviously, like I said in my opening comments, it's obviously an important issue for our residents. So I would support it. Anyways, thank you. I appreciate the time, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay. Over to Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to my previous council colleagues for their questions. A lot has been covered off. Just a couple of questions then for you, Mr. Schick. So have we, given that we're starting to provide enhanced pedestrian crossings on Dawson and Poirier, are we suggesting then that by policy we will have enhanced pedestrian crossing on 60-kilometer roadways? Is that where we're going here?
So overall, that is a project being implemented right now to improve all pedestrian crossings, unsignalized and unstop controlled. So we wouldn't put a warning flasher at a stop control, and we wouldn't downgrade a crossing that's a signalized crossing to a warning flasher. But that is a project that it's not necessarily documented by formal policy, but in terms of administrative process and recognizing our transportation safety plan, one of the objectives of improving pedestrian crossing safety, that is an action plan that we want to see all our, I believe we have in and around 100 additional sites to consider over the next 3 to 4 years, subject to budget approvals and kind of program implementation.
Yep, fair enough. By policy, it doesn't mean you have the ability to implement all at one time, but if that's the intent, certainly would support that. I hate to go back to Morgan again, but just to go there, the resident that came and spoke today talked about the plan to open up Meadowview Drive. And can you just comment on that in light of what he said? Maybe just speak on that particular.
Yeah, absolutely. So this, I mean, so it's conceptual. It's at the planning stages only right now, where the ASP approved for Riverside shows possible realignment of, I guess I'm keep calling it Meadowview Drive, but it's Rankin Drive for the purposes of the Riverside community, and kind of a realignment north to, as the resident had identified, Mr. Matthews had identified, realignment and new intersection linking to Mission Avenue from Rankin. And the planning stages essentially have recommended this from the Transportation Department as well as the Planning Department to acknowledge what the future anticipated needs of the heritage site are to minimize possible. So for one, to provide a link and connectivity from the Riverside community to the broader network as well, and also minimize or eliminate the possible conflict of traffic using the anticipated future heritage sites and high kind of recreational use area. So that realignment of the road would separate the movements and not have shortcutting through a recreational facility, I guess, if you would. With that being said, TIA was done. There obviously is some form of impact to traffic volumes. However, it wasn't identified as substantial. So to be really blunt, traffic from Riverside connecting to Mission would likely, if that was the desired path, continue to connect through McKinney off of Riverside and come down Mission. The ultimate traffic volume on Mission Avenue is not necessarily influenced to the degree that the link itself maybe expected. It's growth, it's development that's influencing those volumes. The link makes it a viable route, and through intersection design and roadway considerations, it'll be a safe route. But that need and that link for residents connecting to the downtown, I from an operational perspective, I don't know whether that link would, without that link, whether those volumes would be mitigated or lessened.
Yeah. So just a follow on then. So Rankin, if we were to move to collectors and local as being 40, that would include Rankin then as well. So you wouldn't go from a 60 to a 40 there. There wouldn't be anything like that happening, correct?
No, correct.
Okay, fair enough. And the reason why I say that is one of the complaints that I've heard on for the full time that I've been here on council is simply it's not what speed limit is necessarily posted. It's just that there's inconsistencies within our community. And I think one of the things that you've put together here with this bylaw amendment is that you've started to address those inconsistencies and brought a sense of coordinated planning to the entire city in terms of how speeds would be managed. And to that end, I think this is a real win, irrespective of what you think about reductions in speeds or whatever. And just for information, not that I've got a lot of it in response from residents in Erin Ridge, but that what I've gotten is that the 40 is not that big of a deal. But in any case, can I talk just a little bit about dangerous goods? It's interesting. We used to have time limited dangerous good routes. Now it's all under the purview of the province to define times, or just explain that to me just so I clearly understand it.
Yeah, so actually what happened is when the previous bylaw amendment, I'm hesitant to say it occurred in 2019 because a lot of that was focused largely just on speed changes. So I think maybe 2017, thereabouts. Timelines maybe getting a little bit wonky here, but at any rate, with what happened was essentially time designated routes were eliminated. And so what happened is that schedule in the bylaw essentially got cut, or well, the bylaw was maintained to have that schedule with nothing on it, no identified kind of items or roadways, and references within the bylaw still kind of identified or linked back to it. And at the time with the update, it was just kind of insinuated that, well, if there's nothing in the schedule, the references are no longer, it's not really relevant, but it's just in the event of possible add-in or new segments for consideration time designated, it was left in. And the recent feedback that we got from the province with their review is that if it's a blank schedule, if it's not being utilized, don't have a schedule and don't reference the schedule. And so that's really at the end of the day what's being amended, what's the amendment.
Okay. And just maybe a process question in relation to dangerous goods route. Is the city notified of any dangerous good routes going through our community in advance of it coming through?
Yeah, there are. Unfortunately, I don't have the specifics or the information around it. So we have a couple of different permitting. For dangerous goods, it actually goes through our fire services, and there's a direct contact number that carriers would be getting in touch with. And then in terms of just general large loads and whatnot, we have it through the provincial Travis, and I won't remember what that acronym is specifically for, so I won't try it. I'll call it Travis and keep a straight face while we say that. But at any rate, essentially, if there's conditions associated with that, with a Travis permitting system that identify all the contact information. So as a carrier, even if they didn't know, say in Alberta, it was their first time coming through, if they went for a provincial permit, they would be provided all the contact information to give notice and appropriate warning.
Fair enough. And as a resident, that gives me a little comfort to know that when things are going through our community that aren't that healthy, that at least somebody's aware that it's going through, and if something untoward should happen, we're prepared to respond. So thank you for that, Mr. Schick. Madam Chair, those are my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Broadhead. Any other questions? Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. Hi, Dean. It's been a long afternoon for you, I'm sure. Hey. So a couple of quick questions. What was the threshold? So what I've noticed is that for majority of the responses, the recommendations did modify based on public feedback, which I was happy to see that you took it into consideration. So what was your threshold of people saying yes or no that made you determine whether or not you wanted to change something?
I got to be really honest and say there was no specific threshold. It was more linked to what the impact and influence to the objectives of the safety plan, what the ultimate conversation pieces were. So some of the, it's fair enough that in the survey, it can be simplified in so many different ways that you just have it as a percent support or percent not support. But I got to be really honest and say that there was very constructive comments provided with the feedback in a lot of it. And so, unlike some other traffic management areas where we're just said we're not doing a good job and that's it, or people are happy, they don't give details. A lot of people to their benefit gave feedback. And so they kind of expressed the rationale as to why they would support it, or largely I would say it was more aligned to why they did not support the recommendations. And hence why we were able to try, and I say try because we weren't successful in everything, but to integrate some of those comments into the final recommendations.
Because the one for the 40 kilometers an hour in local, that definitely had, it was 55 or 57% that said no. So that's pretty close to 60. So I was trying to figure out, I know you had your rationale, but based on public feedback, the majority of people did not support the initiatives. So I was trying to wrap my head around that. And I know you already had statements as to why it's going forward, but that seemed to be an anomaly when I looked at the public feedback compared to what was recommendation that came forward on that. So that's the one I really struggled with. The other question I had, a few of them, but have we heard, because Beaumont changed over to 40 kilometers an hour a little while ago. That's not a recent change for Beaumont, right? So have we had any discussions with Beaumont on how the public has been receptive and have their collision rates gone down in the past several years since they implemented it, and what the public, have they ever done any surveys to see what the people think of it after the fact? Do you know of any of that?
No, I got to be honest. When we did the survey, there wasn't that kind of feedback provided, and we never did a follow-up following that initial survey to get a sense as to who was doing it, where things kind of stood, what management practices were being followed in terms of their traffic management and posting speeds, and so details and follow-up. It's what I anticipate occurring that, as City of Edmonton has implemented it, I suspect a larger portion of the capital region will really start to be a little more, some may have been just waiting to see what the results are and kind of seeing what the recommendations were and what maybe measurables were linked to City of Edmonton advancing it. In our case, I think, again, I don't know in these other areas when they applied it that they did that the level of engineering review that was applied in St. Albert, actually looking at their individual networks and applying what the majority of agencies identified as the influence to their posted speeds being the TAC guidelines. And in the air, again, very few applied the reduced speeds at that point when we were engaging with them, but that would be a fair discussion maybe at that regional level.
Because I know this is what I'm just suggesting, but when it comes forward in February, if we could reach out to those communities and say, do you have the data for number of collisions before and after? Do you have any data on whether or not they have done a follow-up a year or two later and seeing whether or not the residents are happy or not happy with the changes? Because obviously when it first happens for changes, there's a lot of people who are concerned. about don't want change or are concerned about the convenience factor. I'm just not sure if those same feelings extended after time passed. So that might be just helpful as we move forward with the public hearing. The other a couple quick questions. So when I look at the high schools, like I look at, so Paul Kane has a school zone, and now Paul Kane on Cunningham is also considered arterial, correct? But they're 50 kilometers an hour. Then we have other arterials coming at 60 kilometers an hour. And then we have other high schools like Belrose or Esme, and there's no school zone in front of their areas. So I'm looking at like an inconsistency in how we're actually applying considerations for schools and the safety factor for those. So did you have any thoughts about why, I guess, like why Paul Kane and St. Albert High are being treated differently than Esme and Belrose?
Yeah, I don't, to be quite honest, again, one of the issues is the past documentation in regards to some of the posted speeds haven't been utilized. In terms of the reduced speed in that area, I think it's not necessarily linked to the high school itself, Paul Kane, on Cunningham, and it's linked to the higher usage and proximity of the elementary schools down the path and the crossing area of Sir Winston Churchill at Cunningham, as well as the Sunset Boulevard area, the use of the area as a school route to those sites on Sir Winston Churchill. The proximity of the pool, as well as I guess there's a daycare facility and whatnot in that area, may have influenced at the time the implementation of that zone as well. But again, I kind of would think that it's largely around the route and the volume of kids traveling from the Sturgeon area to Sir Winston Churchill sites.
Okay, it just seems very inconsistent is all. And I understand there's a obviously convenience factor on Boudreaux and on Giroux, but it just seems odd that we're just, some of the high schools get it and some don't. The other thought, and I know this probably wasn't in your survey, but for people who are dropping their kids off at Paul Kane, assuming we can go back to in school classes, or continue at least, is that having the school going to start at 8 o'clock actually is very little benefit for the people who are dropping their children off, because school starts at 8 o'clock. And so by the time it actually starts, the 99% of the kids are actually in class. So the time that they're actually moving back and forth is between 7:30 and 8. Has there been any discussion about changing that to 7:30 as a start time? Because then you would actually cover the junior highs and the high schools that do start at 8 or 8:10.
Yeah, I think so. In line with earlier comments, I think there could be opportunity to re-engage. Again, we attempted in the past to touch base with the school boards, as well as individual sites, and there really at the time was dotted any kind of responses suggesting there was a desire to change the school times. I think recognizing that there may be opportunity to get better attention in 2021 compared to 2020 and whatnot. It may be a chance that we go through and engage with the school boards directly again, and if they desire to provide an opportunity for individual school sites to provide that information, I'd be hesitant to suggest that we apply it on a site-by-site basis. And my preference would be to hear from school boards as a general, as almost owners of their school sites, and represent feedback and utilize that. Come to some kind of, if it's not a hybrid of recommendation, because one school board may want one thing, another school board may want another, but come to some kind of final conclusion and recommendation for school zones. And if I can, knowing the timelines and to be fair to these representatives of the school boards and give them opportune time to maybe communicate with us, discuss it, review it internally, we could come back with future proposed changes to the bylaw, so as to, depending council's, this committee and council's desire and direction to administration, we could advance changes with the playground zones and utilize the review and communication with school boards for future considerations, and just put that as a 2021 work plan and seek to have that.
Sure. I noticed just it's a hole, I guess, in the safety area. It's just that because the older the kids are, the sooner they start. So then those are being protected, we'll say, by speed in the afternoons, but not necessarily on their way to school, which can become quite chaotic, especially because it's dark out a lot of the year at that time of day. So if we did hear back from the schools, whether it was a blanket or not, I think it would actually be I think it'd make a difference, I guess is what I'm saying. The final question I had was the $150,000 in improvements. So how many intersections and do you have a general idea of what that's actually going to involve?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's 2 pedestrian crossings identified on Dawson Roadway, at Langholm and Lennox, I believe. And essentially what it would be is overhead, so similar to the styles that have been installed on Portier and, sorry, go
Or
ahead.
no, I was thinking of the not Somerset Churchill, but Sturgeon, like the Sturgeon ones.
Correct. That's right. Yep. But not the signal, but the actual warning flashers. So being that it's a 4-lane undivided roadway, it's not optimal to use the side mount, though, as cost effective and efficient in terms of delivery and completing that would be. It's not beneficial or ideal, being that you don't want to create any possible occlusion or anything like that, and have it overhead so drivers in both lanes can see it very high visibility. And so on average, what we're seeing right now is in and around per overhead site with underground, with supply of materials, design and installation, in and around $70,000, $75,000 per site. So that 150 represents those costs for the 2 sites.
Okay, I thought I was done. I have one more question, Kate, Madam Chair, and that is, and thank you for that. So it's 2 intersections we're looking at right now. What was the decision making to have the survey be different between the online and paper version? I realize that it's obviously shorter for that, but like I'm just looking at, like, we have 2 inconsistent surveys where we would have had an opportunity to ask them specifically, and so why did we do 2 different surveys for the same intended outcome?
Yeah, although my wife would argue size does matter when it comes to surveys. And so as it turns out, the online survey itself gave far more opportunity to engage and give like heavy detail information. The card itself, to be efficient and effective and try and make sure that we had something that was applicable for good mail out and provided the necessary information. We didn't have all the necessary sites linked. It was kind of just general because we needed to have the front it was prepaid postage and whatnot. So it had the city, all that information on the front, and then on the back was kind of the survey questions. And so the attempt was there, and the hopes was that by having the link on the card, people had that same opportunity to review or possibly investigate what maybe the questions were around. I know in the report they identified and said that there wasn't it kind of was a feeling that the cards, there wasn't a high volume of card residents responding to the card that had gone to necessarily the site, just that sheer number, right? That we had in around 3,800, 3,862, I think was the number, visits to the website, and around 5,300 card responses. So they don't add up, and not everyone that answered the card went to the website for the background information. But yeah, it was purely the opportunity
on a page.
my eyesight to read the card. So no, it was just for size of the card. Yeah.
Okay. So basically it was like we're worrying about postage and how we're actually going to get it on. What can fit on a page while you can still read it? That's basically what you're telling me.
Correct. That's right.
Okay, that's it. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you. We are going to take a bio break. The time is 3:20. So is 10 minutes too long, you guys? 3:30? No, I think 10 minutes. We'll be back at 3:30 and we'll continue with questions and then hopefully be able to wrap this up. Thank you. Okay, everybody, it is 3:30. Have we got everybody back? We have our committee members. Good. So we're going to carry on from where we were, which is questions. And before I make any comments or questions, I want to know if anybody has any further questions around what we've heard today. Okay, seeing none. Dean, I just have a couple of comments to make. And I guess the first is, at the end of the day, in terms of speed, going down to 40, the community split, people either have a resonate to the safety aspect of this, or they want to get going and move around the city a little faster. But what you're telling us is that the actual time saved is minimal. Would that be fair?
Correct. Yeah, that's, I mean, it was definitely seemingly split, and that's why kind of some focus was placed on some of the comments and feedback as to why those may not have, or sorry, those may oppose the recommendations. So a fair evaluation and consideration can be made for those comments and those concerns. And at this point, it is kind of split, and a lot of it is around travel time, congestion and whatnot. And to be fair, I think the influence and impact in the neighborhoods may be negligible, and with further considerations of network-wide improvements on the arterial network, like widening, the application of ITS and improvements, intersection design improvements, we can hopefully mitigate that delay and for travelers.
Yeah, I think a lot of the frustration from what I know when I talk to residents is really around, getting down St. Albert Trail faster, and hitting all the lights on Boudreaux and things like that. So thank you for that. You talked about the $41 million cost to local and neighborhood road collisions and all the associated costs over that between 2012 and 2019. Was that information available at any of these engagement sessions? Did the public get those numbers to be able to ascertain?
No, they weren't. The essentially some representation and safety information is on the city website with regards to collision reports and frequency and outcomes, I guess, and network screening. But that specific comments was kind of identified with this presentation to kind of put, and largely, I got to be honest to say, kind of where it stemmed from was some comments around and the fiscal responsibility of the city and the cost associated with implementing the recommended changes. So in terms of safety improvements, we often look to identify what are the cost benefit and whatnot. And so, I just wanted to put that out there as direct costs associated with these incidents. And obviously at this point in time, I could never, guarantee a certain anticipated reduction or influence of that. But for the cost of implementing the speed changes and the signage and infrastructure and pedestrian crossing improvements, we would anticipate improvements in collision reduction and severe collision occurrences being reduced as well. And so with that, there's a kind of that societal cost to our community when these incidents occur. And on the same time, there are direct costs associated with these collisions as well.
Right. So if we take your recommendations and pass them, I'm just thinking of a scenario that I kind of live every day. I'm coming up McKinney and I turn right on Dawson, and now I'm getting to go 60, which I'm very happy about. So I'm going to go 60 down Dawson, and then I'm going to cross over Giroux, and I'm going to carry on Deer Ridge Drive. That is 40, correct?
Correct. Yep.
And then when I turn left on one of the side roads, Dufferin, that is still 40.
Correct.
And when I turn into a cul-de-sac, that is still 40.
Correct.
And when I keep going along Deer Ridge Drive, I'm going 40, and now I'm passing Muriel Martin School, and then I'm going to pass the rink, and then I'm going to pass JJ Nearing, and those are going to be 30.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to double check that because we talk a lot, neighborhood roads, collector roads, local roads, and it's kind of city speak. And it's really important that everybody understands what all those are, and likely they do, but you know, a lot of people don't speak our language. So so I just wanted to double check that that was the case. And then playground zones are a creature of the provincial government. Is that what I heard you say? And they're variable according to 6 different factors?
Right. So essentially, just for clarity, so in the past, the actual timeframes associated with playground zones was provincial. And I can't again remember the time that it was actually changed, but essentially and that was the 8:30 a.m. till 1 hour after sunset. In the recent, I'm going to say within the last 5 years or so, the province has essentially said that it is no longer a provincial mandated time for playgrounds, and individual road agencies or municipalities can set times associated with playgrounds. In St. Albert, as with a lot of agencies, we've just maintained and kept that provincial timeframe. Unlike other cities, City of Edmonton, for example, has applied a time of day associated with it. And so that's associated with a time frame. Now, whether or not a playground or a site is warranted or applicable for a playground zone or a school zone, there are provincial guidelines. So these are not standards. We're not mandated to follow them. There are further considerations that the city can take on. It's low-hanging fruit, and it's a strong application to utilize these guidelines and investigate a site against certain criteria to say whether it should be applicable for a school zone, a playground zone, or whatnot. And those involve those 6 criteria around the type of playground and the infrastructure, the size, its proximity to the roadway, fencing, the type of roadway, and sidewalk and whatnot.
So when we're going to remove a couple of playground zones, those streets are going to be at 40 kilometers because we've approved the general 40 kilometers an hour. Is that correct?
If the 40 is approved, then yes,
if it's approved.
They would be applied to 40. Yep.
And what about Atwood?
So Atwood, it came into it. So we had administration had gone out and performed site reviews. And so what it is, again, it's in true engineering fashion, it's either black or it's white. And so what happened is that site itself was reviewed. And one of the key considerations is proximity of the playground itself to the roadway. And it uses, again, this isn't a city of St. Albert never created these guidelines. We just are following them from the province that they use in and around a 50-meter distance from the roadway for that playground site. And what it was is that site was, I believe off the top of my head, it's around like 55 meters. So applying the standards themselves do not necessarily result in the site being warranted for a playground zone. In recognition of some of the concerns that we heard from residents, and kind of in reviewing the guidelines, they essentially said, okay, well, listen, if there is going to be this kind of gray area. Now, again, I got to be very fair here and say, well, you know, as you start to integrate possible changes to guidelines and whatnot, how far down the path, what becomes acceptable and whatnot. But in this case, recognizing what we heard from the public and the residents of the area in review and what would be a confident still use of the guidelines, we caught it that, okay, you know what, it was, we kind of had the blinders on when we first were going out and applying the guidelines, and now we're holistically looking at it a little bit more in line with what we heard. And
so Atwood remains at 30.
Correct. It would maintain that the playground warning signs and the 30 reduction, 30 kilometer per hour reduction. Okay.
When I did speak to one of the school boards over the weekend, and I'll send you this, Dean, because they've outlined all the changes and what they agree with and what they don't agree with. The only thing that they had around Meadowview was that Meadowview is kind of a narrower street. And as far as their buses go, they probably wouldn't get up to 70 kilometers an hour on that street. Like it's just, it's probably not safe to them or whatever. So, so that was just something that they said it was, it wouldn't impact them, but it's a road that they are extra careful on.
Fair. Good. No, that'd be great if you have specific feedback, and this would be, you know, for any council or committee member, if we have feedback from residents that can inform on recommendations, and I appreciate receiving it.
Yeah, you know, and kudos to them, because they put this together all this morning, because I really only emailed them yesterday to, and so in the 11th hour, they got it. They have a few good points here. So I'll send them along. I think in general, they're pretty good with it all. So that is it for my questions and comments. Any last questions for Dean before we, yes, Mayor.
So Dean, process-wise, if any member of council wants to make a change, like let's say 7 a.m. instead of 8 a.m., something like that, would you need to go through an engineering review of that change? Because the scary thing is to make one change that you consider everything as a holistic bubble, and that one change has a cascading effect negatively. Or I don't think that example, 7 a.m. would be a huge one, but you know what I'm saying. So we have a non-statutory public hearing planned. I guess the question is, how much time do you need to make some of these adjustments?
I think we can turn them around really quick. I mean, especially if they're very specific. Now, I guess it is relevant again. So one thing that I would probably recommend is if you're requesting changes to say what's on the table right now in terms of amendments to the playground zone, you know, kind of following suit with that time of day, it is probably really fast turnaround, and we can do that and say, okay, well, you know, there's nothing necessarily that administration is going to be requesting that or suggesting that it may not be implemented, but if it becomes contentious, we can always present that information and capture at the very least for considerations of alternatives for council's consideration with the bylaw and whatnot.
And would it be safe to say that any changes that made speed limits lower or kept speed limits low would be easier turnaround than if we decided to, let's say, to make St. Albert Trail 70, just random. Those increases speeds, you would need more time than the decreases. Would that be a fair general statement?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Great. So one more question, because I'm back on Ray Given Drive and the wildlife. Is there street lights along the entire length of Ray Given?
Yes. And so right now in where it's twins, so from the South City limit to north of Leclerc, there's streetlights on both sides for north and southbound traffic on the east and west sides of Ray Given. Where it's down to 2 lanes because of wider illumination and whatnot, and the only 2 lanes, there's streetlights on the east side.
Okay. All right. As an IR, because I'm sure you do not have this information, can I have wildlife incident a report on collisions with wildlife on Ray Given Drive?
Oh, absolutely. Bear with me.
Oh, you have it right there?
I do, because we were actually investing as part of the design for Ray Given. We're investigating this. I apologize for a slight delay here, but I should be able to have that.
In the meantime, I will be looking for a counselor to make a motion on these 4 points.
I may have, you know what,
Yeah, you can do it as an IR, Dean.
Yeah, I'll take it as an IR. I know it's less than 10 incidents, I believe, over the last few years here. Oh.
Well, Dean, make it an IR, because as you can tell from the line of questioning is I'm still thinking that 80 kilometers an hour on Ray Given, once it's all twinned, is appropriate, but I need some more engineering advice on that. And it doesn't even have to be this amendment. It could be in a future amendment. So maybe as an IR, give me some of the stats you have for wildlife interactions and maybe any general engineering opinion on what the repercussions of going to 80 on that road would be.
Yeah, sounds good. And we have quite a bit of that background information in phase 2, like tech memos and whatnot. That's
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Apologize because I did just lie. I have the information in front of me and I was way off in my estimate. So we'll get that information to you.
Okay. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Mayor. Councillor Watkins. Yeah.
I'll move it, Madam Mayor, or Madam Chairman. The Community Growth and Infrastructure Standing Committee recommend to Council that, number 1, the public consultation report, City of St. Albert Traffic Network Speed Review Report provided as an attachment to the January 18th, 2021 agenda report entitled Bylaw 18-2005 Traffic Bylaw Amendments be received as information. Number 2, that Bylaw 4-2021 being Amendment 16 to Traffic Bylaw 18-2005 be read at first time. 3, that a non-statutory public hearing to allow resident stakeholders to be heard by Council on concerns with the Bylaw 18-2005 amendments be scheduled for February 16th, 2021. And 4, that subject to a third and final reading of the Traffic Bylaw 4-2021, $230,000 be approved to implement pedestrian crossing improvements, field signage installation, and perform public messaging for the traffic bylaw amendments and be funded from the Traffic Safety Reserve.
Thank you for moving those 4 recommendations. Any opening remarks? I accept them.
There's obviously been a lot of work done on this. It's going to be interesting to hear what comes out of the public hearing, and I look forward to deliberating on this in Council. And it's a report well done.
Yeah.
Mr. Schick had a lot of answers to give, and he gave a lot of answers today.
Yeah, we thank you, Mr. Schick.
Yes, thank you.
Any other committee members around debate? Great. Okay. Well, I call the question on all 4 recommendations. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. It was already said, Mr. Schick, but thank you for everything. That was a long presentation that you had to give to us and a lot of information, and we appreciate all of the work that's been done over the past few years on this and your information at the ready. So this will move on to Council for debate. So thank you. And after that, meeting is adjourned. Everybody have a good afternoon.
Likewise. See you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Mayor.